Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our workshop on fostering effective study habits. At the end of this workshop, we hope that you will be able to use our tips and tricks to really build your language study plan. And more importantly, you will be able to stick to it and achieve your ultimate goal. Today, we have a very special guest who I will introduce in just a moment. But before I do so, a little bit about me and some housekeeping for the session. So, my name is Sylvia, and I am Head of Methodology here at Preply. This means I'm responsible for creating all of the learning resources that you can find on Preply to help you on your language learning journey. And I say journey because, like our life journey, your language learning journey may be filled with roadblocks, but also achievements. And the important part of this journey is to enjoy every bit of it and to keep moving forward. The achievements will be immense. So by learning another language, you'll be directly connecting with other cultures. You'll be learning to foster an appreciation for traditions, religions, arts, and the history of people associated with that language. But you're also training your brain, improved memory, problem solving, and critical thinking skills, enhanced concentration, ability to multitask, and better listening skills are just some of the benefits that you will gain as you go on this journey. So before we start, I want to share a huge congratulations to all of you for just being here, for attending this workshop, and making this choice to spend 45 minutes with us today. And now on to some housekeeping. So on your right is the questions tab and the polls tab. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the workshop, and I would encourage you to put any questions, any super important burning questions you might have into the questions tab so we can answer them at the end. You can also download your free study plan PDF, which you can use alongside this workshop. Yes, we want to get you involved in this workshop. We want to make sure you come out of this workshop with a concrete learning plan. And if you stick around to the end of this webinar, we'll also share a code so you can get 50% off your first lesson at Preply. And now to our special guest. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Lindie Bott, a renowned language coach and designer. Lindie, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I see some familiar names here. Great to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lindie. I am a South African product designer. Actually, product design has nothing to do with language learning, but language learning is my biggest hobby. I've been self-studying languages since about 2009. And right now I also work as a language coach, helping people figure out how to schedule their language learning and what are the best resources and methods. So enjoy the workshop, and I'm really glad to be here with you all.
We are so happy to have you, Lindie, and I'm really excited to hear all about your tips and tricks. I mean, really, she speaks so many languages. It's amazing. And it's always better to hear from the horse's mouth. So thank you, Lindie, and let's move on. So as any workshop or any class, we really need to start off with the learning objectives. So what are we going to talk about today? What are we going to cover in today's session? So first of all, we're going to talk about the Preply 3 C's of effective language learning. Then we're going to talk about setting realistic but powerful goals. We're then going to move on to how you can keep committed to your language plan. We're then going to talk about making the most of your classes with your tutors. We're going to talk about fun ways to learn outside of class. We're then going to finish off with how to create a routine and how to track the progress of your language journey. And then finally, we're going to keep 10 minutes or so at the end for a little bit of a Q&A session. So as I mentioned before, feel free to start adding your questions into that question tab. So when we get towards the end of the session, we can answer them. And we may well answer a few questions as we're going through the material as well, if it comes up. So are you all excited? Are you all ready? Because I am. Let's kick off. Let's go to the next slide and let's think a little bit about the 3 building blocks of effective learning. So here at Preply, we obviously give a lot of lessons. We think about how our students can learn the most effectively while the lessons are engaging and fun and exciting. And we've come to the conclusion that effective learning is based around the following 3 pillars that you can see here on this slide. So first of all, commitment. Learning requires both short and long-term commitment. Language learning is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and sustaining motivation can sometimes be really tricky. So we've got a couple of tips for you to think about. When it comes to learning a language, I want you to think about lesson frequency. I mean, the forgetting curve is a terrible thing. Information gets lost over time when we don't make any attempt to retain it. And the best way to fight against this curve, to combat this curve, is through spaced learning. So you may leave this workshop with your head full of tips only to find that you can remember very little in a few hours. So schedule some time tomorrow to review this information, and you can even use your PDF worksheet for that. And then we need to think about lessons. So if we're talking about spaced lessons, if we're talking about frequency of lessons, 3 lessons a week is perhaps ideal. It gives you time to review your learnings in between lessons, time to build on that learning in between lessons. And in my experience, the more lessons you can take, the faster you will learn. Learning strategies. Now, you do also want to think about learning strategies. We've already mentioned the importance of spacing out your learning, and Lindie's going to share a lot of information about how she schedules her learning in just a little bit. Think about how you learn best. Think about how good you are at perhaps retrieving information from your brain. How can you practice this? How can you personalize your learning? How can you make everything that you learn relevant to you? Because that is really going to help you on your journey if you become an active agent in that learning. So as Confucius once said, tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. The second pillar that we have here at Preply is classes. Live lessons are an essential part of that effective learning process. You're going to be focusing on producing the language. You're going to be focusing on building your confidence up with your tutor. And I really like to think that it's a learning partnership, right? So I'm learning Catalan at the moment, and my tutor understands what I need. She understands what I find hard, what I find difficult. And so every lesson, she's almost building a personalized lesson just for me, and really, really helps. So it's great when you have your tutor, really talk to them, help them understand your gaps, understand your needs, and that means you will learn faster. You want to focus on producing the language, making mistakes. Mistakes are an absolutely essential part of the learning process, and I think it's really good fun to experiment with that language, especially when you're in a supportive environment with your tutor. You will become a confident communicator after time. And then finally, the third pillar is continuous learning. By continuous learning, I mean what happens outside of the lesson. So you could have continuous learning through using the Preply app, playing around with our bite-sized self-study activities. It could be about adding new vocabulary flashcards to your collections. It could be taking quizzes and tests. But it can also be about reading the news in your target language, watching your favorite show, incorporating that language in your day-to-day routines. I firmly believe that little and often is key, and to make it fun and enjoyable. If you're enjoying it, you're going to be learning as well. But anyway, that's enough with the theory. Let's get practical. We're going to start this webinar off, or this particular part of the webinar off, with goal setting. So do you know what a SMART goal is? Perhaps we can launch that poll and get you voting on what you think a SMART goal is out of those 2 options. So is the poll out there? It is. I can see people are beginning to answer. So I'm going to give you a moment just to answer that poll. And while you're answering it, I'm also going to go through what really is a SMART goal. So SMART goal is specific. You need, when you're thinking about your language learning journey and you're thinking about what you want to achieve, you need to state it. State what you're going to do. Use action words, use numbers. And then you need to make sure that your SMART goal is measurable, because progress motivates us. Progress keeps us on track. Progress keeps us exciting. So you need to make sure your goal is trackable and attainable. It also needs to be achievable. Now, who hasn't been in that situation where you have huge ambitions about what you're going to be able to do, and then suddenly you think, actually, you don't meet that goal, you feel down, and you think, why did I make such a huge goal in the first place? So you really need to think about smaller goals, monthly goals, and make them really achievable. Then they should be relevant. So every goal you should make should be aligned with your values. They should be aligned with your long-term objectives as well. And finally, time-bound. Who doesn't like a deadline? Me, I hate deadlines. I must say, absolute hate deadlines. However, I do know if I put myself a date to do something, then it will mean I will really try and make it and try and get there and make sure that I do what I need to do by that deadline. So those are SMART goals. And I would really encourage you to open up that PDF that we've shared and start thinking about your own SMART goals. Start thinking about what you're going to achieve over a week, perhaps over a month. And even if you have a much longer goal, then think how you can break it down. Now, Lindie, tell us about you. How do you set realistic goals? Are you one of these people who sets massively ambitious goals and doesn't quite get there? Or do you think about your goals and think, I'm going to make small goals and achieve them much more often?
This really depends on where I'm at and which language I'm learning. So if I need to study for a very specific exam, for instance, then definitely it will be time bound. I'll have a deadline, I'll have a structure, I'll know what grammar structures I need to go through for the exam. So depends on what I want to reach in the language. My goals will differ for each language. I don't tell myself I want to be fluent in all 12 languages I'm learning. Maybe if I'm living in Vietnam, for instance, learning Vietnamese would be my main goal, and then I'll have sub-goals for the other languages. And I think as you grow into learning how you develop as a language learner, your goal-setting methods will change too. So at the start, you might have a lot of energy and you'll feel, oh, I need to set really lofty goals. And after a year or two, you'll realize maybe having broader goals is better. And I saw Julia mentioned in the chat, sometimes having too lofty or specific goals can be stressful for you. And that's absolutely normal. Everybody has a different way that they learn. And basically, to summarize and answer your question, Sylvia, it depends on the language, the energy, the time I have in my life, and if there are any things like big events or travels or exams coming up. So it's different in every situation.
Absolutely. And I think everyone has their own way of making goals. And in fact, it's one of the hardest things at the start of that language learning journey to really think about what you want to achieve, because it's very easy to get into these goals such as I'd like to be fluent in this language, rather than thinking, actually, what do I need to be able to do with that language? And then that becomes the goal itself. So yeah, absolutely. I think everyone has a slightly different way of making goals, but it's always helpful to think about how I can achieve that goal. Okay, let's move on to motivation. So there are two main motivation types, and I just wanted to sort of briefly run you through them. So there's being motivated because there's a reward on the table. So perhaps I am going to learn, English. I'm going to give an example of English, although I know everybody here is learning lots of different languages. I'm going to learn English because I need it for my job. If I can speak better English, then I'm more likely to be promoted, etc. So that's one kind of motivation. But the ultimate motivation, the motivation that everyone is really looking for, is being motivated to do something because of the pure joy and happiness that it brings. And as you imagine, we're all about that intrinsic motivation. So maybe I can turn this also over to Lindie. Like, how do you tap into your intrinsic motivation. And how do you work? Do you often start with more extrinsic, external motivation, and then move into the intrinsic motivation?
Yeah.
Tell me about your motivation.
That also goes up and down. And I'll start by saying Korean is a language that I've been learning for almost 12 years. And there have been times where I've said, I just want to not even think about this language. I am giving up. It goes up and down. But every language that I've learned has had a different reason or motivation. I started learning Vietnamese by an accident when I accidentally downloaded a song which I thought would be Korean, and it ended up being Vietnamese. And I said, what is this beautiful sounding language? I must learn it. That was many years ago before Spotify. Now you know how old I am. But
happy coincidences.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you might have extrinsic motivation that, oh, I need to, I'm moving to this country. I have to learn it for my job. And once you start learning it, you learn about the culture. Languages and cultures are intertwined. And then you'll start building that intrinsic motivation from, oh, now I have friends. Now I want to learn it. And I know, with COVID, we can't really travel now, but you can create your intrinsic motivation for yourself. So you might feel that I would not recommend learning a language just for the sake of learning it. You have to at least be interested in the culture, the people, the music, the language itself. Otherwise, learning a language just for the sake of being able to say you're going to learn it is not going to help. But you can also create that environment for yourself online. If you're not able to travel, you can join Twitter where you can meet fellow language learners, and there you'll get more motivation as a community and learn with other people. So motivation does fluctuate, but it helps to do some introspection and think, what is important to me? What are my values? And am I truly interested in this language?
Absolutely. And I think that's really curious what you mentioned about language learning communities, getting peer-to-peer support. So do you find by being able to share that language with other people, being able to get sort of responses from other people, and so they can essentially help you, does that help you sustain your motivation over time?
Absolutely. I also do need to warn that putting yourself out there online can be stressful because there might be pressure to reach your goals at the same pace as other people. So I just want to put it out there and remind everybody here that what you see online is generally the best parts of other people's journeys. But I like to be very honest, and on my channel, you'll see that I also share the ups and downs of language learning and why it's hard, and how to improve. And that builds motivation as well when you're able to be honest. Vulnerability builds community and connections with people. So yes, Sylvia, it does help to have people who you can share that with, but doing that very honestly helps more.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you do when you hit that wall, Lindie? Like, how do you find, because I mean, a lot of our students who, especially they might hit an intermediate level, so they progress quite quickly at the start. They really genuinely see a lot of progress. And then they stop and they don't see that progress quite as much. And that can be demotivating. So how do you get yourself over those hurdles?
Yeah, we were just talking about that on Twitter recently, and I said that being at the intermediate level is like being friend zoned by a language. You just don't progress and you stay at the same. So number one, coming to terms with the fact that once you're upper intermediate advanced, your progress is going to be a little slower. And it helps to look back and say, what was I able to say a few months ago and what I am able to say now? So tracking your progress can help you stay motivated. And also taking breaks. It's like going to the gym. You do need rest days. It's important to rest as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked earlier about space learning as well. So completely have one day of learning, one day off, one day of learning, one day off can really work. So I believe you've put together some tips that you want to share with everybody. Would you mind going through those for our audience?
For sure. So I'll just follow them here. The one thing that I started doing very early in my language journey was to journal. So you can journal about your language learning journey and say, okay, this week I'm going to try to do a lesson from my textbook every week, or this week I'm going to try and go to a language exchange. So you can write about how you learn, and that can help you formulate the best methods for you. Or you can journal in the language you are learning. And that is really the best thing. That is how I was able to learn Korean, and be able to write it a lot faster, because every single day for 3 years, I kept a diary in Korean and also in Japanese and Mandarin Chinese. And it's okay if you write like a complete beginner, as long as you have someone who can correct it for you. If you have a tutor or a friend, journaling is a very good way to stay motivated. And of course, you're going to be writing about topics that are of interest to you, that you talk about normally. And you're going to build your vocabulary in specific stuff, which you can then take over into speaking situations. If you aren't shy, camera shy, or even voice recording shy, another way to track your progress is to record yourself. You don't have to start a YouTube channel. You can just record it on your phone. And that helps you stay motivated, because you can go back a few months and say, actually, I have improved. Because once you get to intermediate, seeing your progress might be a little harder. So this could help. If you're able to plan a vacation in these times, that is always motivation, but you can try doing it online. You can recreate that space for yourself. See if you can turn your devices into the language you're learning, do a virtual trip to the country, find a language exchange partner. And speaking of language exchange partners, one of the best things that has happened to my language learning is just joining Twitter. It's so simple. There are a bunch of us on Twitter who use the hashtag #LangTweet, and we just talk about how we learn languages, why we love them, and just having that sense of community is so great to keep you motivated.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes total sense. I especially like the idea about journaling, because you can see that progress. You can flick back a month or 2 months before and see how much your vocabulary has expanded and how you're making fewer and fewer mistakes. And that's definitely a great way to keep yourself motivated and on track. And you said before, a little bit of self-reflection is also helpful as well. So by keeping a journal, you can really see what types of learning strategies have worked for you in the past and what types might work for you more in the future. Fantastic. So I'm wondering whether we've got any other tips in the chat as well. So feel free to share your tips with us as well. It's always interesting to see how other people sustain that commitment and sustain that motivation. Okay, we're going to move on to how to make the most of live classes, how to make the most of the lessons. So, Lindie, tell us about your experience with finding a tutor. So when you start learning a language, do you think, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is find a tutor, or do you pick up a book? Tell us a little bit about how you kick that journey off.
Yeah, as I always say, it depends on your goals in the language. It is absolutely fine if you feel that you only want to be able to read and write, then you don't need a tutor. But most of us, we're here because we love talking to people. We want to speak. And what better way to speak than to speak with a tutor? That always helps me. So sometimes it is hard if you're an absolute beginner in the language. When I started learning Vietnamese, it's a tonal language. It's very hard. I waited for a little while so that I could self-study and just feel a little more comfortable with myself before I booked a tutor. But with other languages that maybe I've been learning for a while, I like to book a tutor while I'm in it. And you can also book a tutor for very specific structured lessons if you want to go through a textbook or a curriculum. Or like me, what I mostly enjoy doing is to book a tutor for conversational lessons. I like to say, well, I can study the grammar on my own, but I need somebody to practice with. So some of my tips for how you can make the most out of your live classes, in the first part would be choosing a tutor. So if you're learning a language that has different accents or dialects, perhaps Spanish, would you want to learn the Mexican Spanish accent, Spain Spanish? That is the first thing to consider if your language takes that into account. Find a tutor you're comfortable with, maybe around your age so that you have similar interests within your time zone. You can watch their example videos and see if they speak at a pace which is fast or slow enough to you. Do you share any similar interests? And always come prepared. When I'm a beginner, I like to write some sentences down. I know that my Hungarian tutor will always ask me, how was your week? And if I've done something new, maybe we had a new joiner at work and I have to prepare their onboarding documentation. I don't know how to say onboarding documentation in Hungarian, but if I just write a sentence and prepare myself, then I feel a lot more comfortable and you'll ease into it. It's okay to be nervous at the first beginning parts of your lessons. Also, communicate with your tutor. They are there to help you, but you must also help them. They don't know if you want to focus more on pronunciation or speaking or vocabulary. So it's okay to be honest and set expectations with them. I told my Korean tutor when I was practicing for the TOPIK Korean exam, I said, correct every single mistake I make, because this is a language that I'm already upper intermediate advanced in. What I need from my tutor is every single mistake to be corrected. Hungarian, I'm still, conversational beginner. We're going to slow down the conversation if you fix all my mistakes. What I want to do is just talk about things I enjoy. So communicate that to your tutor. And if you are using Preply, there's a wonderful vocabulary tool where you can go through flashcards and repeat the vocab. So take your lesson a little bit further. Write down the words that you've learned from your tutor, pop them into the vocabulary tool, review it. You don't have to have lesson homework, but you have to put in that extra step to go through the content that you've learned so that you can progress faster and converse more with your tutor.
So would you say, I mean, with all of that bearing in mind, would you say that when you meet your tutor for the first time, you should have that conversation about what you're trying to achieve, perhaps about your experience in the language, whether you want to focus more on speaking, reading, writing, and perhaps even establish an error correction policy? Does that work when you have a tutor?
Absolutely, yes. Sometimes you don't actually know what you want in the language too, and that's okay. So that happened with my Spanish. I told my tutor, I don't know if I need structured grammar lessons or conversational lessons, but it was good to have that conversation because then we could work out a schedule of 1 week we're going to do an intensive grammar lesson and the other week you're going to do conversational. So to answer your question, Sylvia, absolutely. It is good to communicate and set those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's quite often at the start of the lessons, and sort of revisit that communication on a regular basis as well, because your goals will change as you get more confident in the language. You might want to focus a little bit more on accuracy and less on just communicating. Perfect. So yeah, so do share any tips and tricks for making sure that you keep your tutor on track, and how you talk to your tutor, how you share your goals, and perhaps also how you share your strengths and weaknesses. So if I can take you back to that PDF, then the activity we'd like you to do here is think of a day, think a time of the week that's best for you to take a language class. I mean, Lindie, are you a morning lark or are you a bit of a night owl? When do you like to take your classes? Do you have any particular routine that works for you?
I am definitely a night owl. I'm not a human being in the morning, but I like to take time for myself in the evening. So I have late afternoon lessons. But something I would just throw in here is keep track of your energy levels throughout the day. Sometimes after lunch, we have a slump, we get tired. That's not the best time to try and use your brain. So maybe you can just keep a log or a schedule or use a sleep app and see when in the day do I feel the best, and then book your lessons. And then the other thing I would say is just remember that the amount of physical hours you have in a day does not correlate to the mental and emotional energy you will have. You might have had a very long work day, and the last thing that you want to do is book a language lesson. That being said, having a language lesson every week in my calendar, sometimes I feel like, oh, this is the last thing I want to do. But once I've done it, I always feel so good. I've learned something. It's really great to just have an anchor there. So even if you don't have a very structured schedule and language plan, keep your language lessons as a little anchor in your calendar. That will just make you feel like, well, at least I've done something this week.
Absolutely. And sometimes it gives you something to look forward to as well. So if you're working all day and you just want to switch off and you want to just change your focus, then that might be the time for you to have your lesson. In my experience, I like to start my day. It's one of my favorite things to do. If I can start my day with a lesson, then I start work afterwards just feeling really energized and reinvigorated. And I start using what I've learned in that lesson and start trying to translate things and so on. And it does make a big difference, understanding yourself and knowing that when works best for you. Perfect. Okay. So this is a very fun slide. So we know, I mentioned earlier about continuous learning. We talked about the importance of finding opportunities to learn between your lessons as well. For me, studying little and often is really good. It creates a habit which ultimately beats that lack of motivation and keeps the language really fresh in my mind. So Lindie, can I ask you to explain this particular part of the workshop? How do you find activities that you really enjoy? How can you then connect those with ways to use the target language while doing these?
Specifically for me, because I am a designer, I like to find ways to combine language learning and design. So maybe if I need to look up a specific tutorial on how to design something, I might do that in another language. Or I might read in Spanish, how do people design apps? So it doesn't matter what field you work in or what you're studying. If you're at an intermediate or so level in the language, what you can do is try to do some research in the field that you work in the language you're learning. Podcasts are something that you can do very passively and listen to about the topics that you're interested in. And I think why we're also focusing on hobbies here is that's the thing we spend a lot of time thinking about. That's what we love. That's what we enjoy. So of course, we're going to want to talk about it. And you're going to be able to reinforce your vocabulary a lot more if you talk about it repeatedly. So find a hobby and maybe draw a mind map about the vocabulary words that are relevant to it. Maybe you're into pottery. Do you know how to say clay or tools or workshop or pot in the language? Take your hobby and see how can I convert this into something that can be beneficial to my language learning. That's one thing that I could recommend. What about you, Sylvia?
Yeah, absolutely. So personally, I am big into listening to songs and music of the language I'm learning. So as I said before, I'm learning Catalan. I live in Barcelona, so I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to practice when I go shopping and so on. But once you've got past the basic phrases, I actually want to appreciate the beauty of the language. So when I commute into work, I will often put on a particular song, listen to it, repeat it, and so on. And every day, I always try and read the news in Catalan as well. And then if I don't understand it all, that's okay. Like I get most of the meetings because I know what's going on. And again, the community side, I really like to find people who will be patient because my Catalan at the moment is very low level. But to see their faces that they are so appreciative that I'm trying to have a conversation in Catalan with them, they forgive me my mistakes and it makes it fun. And so now when I go and see my Catalan group of friends and they say, go on, Sylvia, you order the drinks. And I'm like, oh, I'm the only one who's not Catalan, but it's fun. And it just gives me a sense of achievement when I actually do it correctly as well. So yeah, I think that's sort of one of the ways I do. I mean, podcasts as well. I'm not at the stage of podcasts for Catalan, but I also speak Spanish. And yeah, I think podcasts are brilliant. Short podcasts as well. Sometimes I find it's hard, like if the podcasts are maybe more than 20 to 25 minutes to remain concentrated. But there are lots of great podcasts out there. And then books, of course. Once you're feeling that little bit more comfortable, then you can start reading in the language itself. And it's such a joy when the author is writing in their native language and you get to read it too. So I think, as you said before, there are many ways. And I think it's great in the chat. I'm seeing it's all on fire as everybody's giving us some ideas and saying to relate stories in your head, to write stories in your head, which is fantastic. And you mentioned before, Lindie, that sometimes recording yourself can be super useful just so you can hear how you speak. So maybe you read something and you perhaps read a poem that you like, and then you practice actually reading it itself. So yeah, lots of fantastic ideas there. So we're also thinking about planning as well. So when we talk about continuous learning, you've got your lessons anchored in. Lindie mentioned before, it's always great to put that there. But what about outside of the lesson? How can you possibly plan for those spontaneous moments where you're enjoying the language?
So what I've put on the slide is more of a consideration of what type of planner person are you. I think when we look for a lot of language learning advice online, people are all focused on productivity and plan your schedule like this and this, and it can tire us out. So here's some things to think about and see what would work for you personally. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are more serious and you might have a goal like an exam to work towards, then you need to set these very strict goals for yourself and track your progress and set days that you need to study for. I will go through my notes just in a moment where you can see how I actually laid out my schedule and planning for learning Korean. That's coming up right now. Another thing that you can try is just to do small, consistent daily progress. You don't need to plan everything in your life. Just doing a little bit each day is better than doing nothing, and then tracking it after to see naturally where does your time go throughout the day. So there's the 15, 30, 15-minute rule that you can try. In the morning, do 15 minutes of a vocabulary review. In the middle of the day, have a solid study session of half an hour, maybe during your lunch break. And in the evening, review it for about 15 minutes. Also, immersion, create a very immersive environment for yourself in the language. You don't need to prepare everything exactly, just start changing things in your life to the language. And then if you're very busy, like myself, I was managing a design team. I work as a product designer. I really don't have time to sit and learn languages as much as I wish I could do that. So what I do then is I set much broader goals. Instead of saying every week I need to do one chapter, I say, okay, what do I want to do this month? I want to learn Korean. I'm going to read one article. I'm going to write one essay in Hungarian. I'm going to listen to 2 Spanish podcasts. And then whenever I feel like it in the month, that's when I'll do those activities and just tick them off. Don't need to schedule them in, just have broad ideas. So here's an example of how I actually use my language planners. These are photos from my diary. I hope nobody can understand Hungarian because there is some personal stuff in there. So on the left, I have the days of the week where I write study Hungarian or do design homework or whatever. For this month, actually, I had a Hungarian TV interview, so that's in there. So you write what you want to do or what you did. And then on the other page, I would track how long do I spend working on these languages. So for that week, I studied 3.5 hours. I prepared 3.5 hours for my TV interview, and I studied 6 hours of Hungarian. So you can track your time, and that's also a way to keep yourself consistent. Don't do this if it stresses you out. Some people do get stressed by metrics and numbers. I like it because I work with data. That's part of my job. So take this advice, try it out. If you don't like it, absolutely fine. And then right at the bottom corner there, memorable moments. That's what I also like to do at the end of every month or quarter. And just pat myself on the back and say, hey, you did an interview in Hungarian. You spoke to someone in Spanish. You read that book. Reward yourself for your progress.
I love that. I love finding those small moments to really celebrate as well, because it just keeps you on track. When you can see how much you've progressed and so on, and you write it down, then you can also flick back and see it. There is a lot of love going on for you in the chat right now, Lindie. People are so excited to be seeing insights into how you work and how your mind works.
I am so shy to see there are Hungarian people here. Thank you. So for this slide, this is more if you're interested in writing. This is another way to track your progress or your learning. So a question I get a lot is, what am I supposed to write about? It just helps to set yourself down and brainstorm a few topics that you're interested in. This is very personal to me and my hobbies. Maybe I want to write about what's my 5-year plan. How do you advocate for good user experience design and business goals? Loneliness, something that I experience sometimes, or productivity, right? These are very specific to me. Think and say, what do I like talking about? What do I want to talk about? And make a list. Then on the right, this is how I structure my writing pieces. I have one notebook for all the essays I write in languages, and I color code it. This was specifically for a language challenge where we wanted to write something in a language every day in November. So pink dot is for Hungarian, brown is for Spanish, and green is for Japanese. And I rotated every day. I wrote one little essay. If that's too much, you can write 1 sentence, 2 sentences, try and make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of what's coming down from all of this, from all of these tips that you're sharing, is that you can start by putting into practice some of these tips, and then you work out what works for you, what gives you pleasure, what makes this experience enjoyable for you. And that's what you continue with as well. I mean, I think just making that time to write and to have it physically on paper? Or would you say this works equally as well as if I were to write it on a computer? Where do you stand on the writing things physically down?
That depends on your preference. I like to write by hand. I feel like I remember things better, especially if it's a language with a different script, with a stroke order. So anything is fine. I just want to touch on something that Maria said here. She says, I want to write, but I still have to look up many words in order to express myself fully. That's absolutely normal. These languages that I'm writing in is languages that I can communicate in at an intermediate level. For beginner languages, I do not write essays. What I do is I take sentences that I find somewhere else, such as during a language lesson, from a textbook, from if you're reading subtitles on a video, just write 1 or 2 sentences down. And then what you can do is replace the words, take the nouns, change the nouns, maybe take a question that you saw in a textbook and answer it for yourself. As long as you are writing, you don't need to be creating new stuff out of nothing. You can still be copying down sentences. So the last thing I'll say on that is when I was a complete beginner in learning Korean, I had a lot of language exchange partners who I would text in Korean. And I was really bad, very basic at Korean. But every single sentence that my language partner wrote back to me, I wrote in a notebook. And I studied that and I highlighted and I memorized it in chunking. I always like to memorize set phrases. For instance, if you travel, you learn the phrase, where is the bathroom? You don't learn where, you don't learn how to say the bathroom and a grammar structure and put it together. You memorize a set phrase. So to get back to what Maria said, it's okay if you're just writing stuff down. You don't need to produce your own content if you're not ready.
Absolutely. And we had a few other questions as well saying, could you just quickly go over the 15-30-15 rule again?
You can, that actually comes from a book by Alex Rawlings, How to Speak Any Language Fluently. So you can look it up there, but just make it your own. Take 15 minutes in the morning to review what you learned the previous day. Do half an hour of actual solid studying, active studying in the middle of the day. And then at the end of the day, take 15 minutes to review what you've learned.
Perfect. And Camille's also saying absolutely set phrases are key. And they also help her remember vocab words then they're put into the context, because that's also really important when it comes to these phrases, is you learn the language in the context that you're going to need it, rather than just learning the odd word here or there. Learning sentences is a great way. And as I said before, lots of admiration for your journals and the beauty of your journals as well. Right, well, we are coming to the end of this workshop. I can't believe how fast this time has flown. So I'm just going to go back into teacher mode and give you a quick recap of everything that we've covered, and then we'll see if we have any time for questions. So first of all, tip number 1 is understand how you are motivated, understand what makes you motivated, how you can sustain that motivation. Set some SMART goals based on why you're learning the language. Take consistent classes. B, make sure that you have time for your classes, you have time for your study outside of your lessons as well. Studying a little and often. If we can do the 15-30-15, then that's going to really help you accelerate that learning as well. Take a moment to look back on your progress and really enjoy and congratulate yourself on how far you've come. But also don't forget about those gaps. So you need to make sure that as you're congratulating the good, also think about, okay, where have I still got room for improvement and what do I need to do next? And finally, really enjoy it. Like, really enjoy the language learning journey you're on. Enjoy making mistakes. I have friends when I first came out to Spain and they taught me Spanish essentially, and they still laugh at some of the ridiculous things that I said. We've been friends for 15 years. Every Christmas dinner it comes up, and it just shows how much it's just genuine enjoyment. It's fun. So, and find a community. We have this hashtag coming up, Preply Workshop Fam. I am totally in for the Preply Workshop Fan hashtag. Let's definitely get that together. And it would be great. And it's just so lovely to have everybody so interactive with the chat. It's been on fire, and I hope we've given you lots of useful tips. Lindie, thank you so much. You've been an absolute star for sharing all of your language learning secrets. Do we have time for a few questions before we give you your promo? Oh, no, we're going to give you your promo link here. So feel free to take this 50% off your first lesson. You can choose the tutor that best meets your needs. We have lots and lots of tutors who have all sorts of specializations from all over the world who are just waiting to get that trial lesson booked by you and really help you on your language learning journey. So, Lindie, any last words?
I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who has been so interesting and exciting in the comment section. It's been wonderful to interact with you all. I'm not sure if we have time for a Q&A, but do feel free to reach out to me on Twitter to use that hashtag, and we can keep the conversation going there.
Absolutely. And likewise, go and have a lovely evening. Start thinking about those goals, and perhaps we can run this in a year's time and you can all come back and tell us how much you've learned. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.